Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you're tuning in from. In today's episode of the Product Angle Show, we are going to talk about how to break into product management and the first 90 days with Satish and Neeraj. Good morning, guys. How are you guys doing?
Morning, Pradeep. How are you?
I'm good. It's nice and sunny. You can see outside, and the weather's warming up, so I can't complain.
That's awesome. It seems like a perfect environment to play some cricket out there. Good morning, folks. It's a bright and wonderful Saturday morning here in the Bay Area as well.
Yep, England are doing pretty good. I checked the score just before the stream. 3 wickets down against West Indies, so can't complain there either.
Awesome.
So, Satish, tell us who you are and what you do.
Sure. Let me start. First of all, thanks for having me on this. So a little bit about myself. My name is Satish Madiraju. I'm currently a product leader at a leading cybersecurity organization called Fortinet, headquartered here in Bay Area. Who am I? I'm a product professional for a little over a decade with product experience in large organizations and like Cisco, and previously very early in my career in cybersecurity startups like Infoblox and Ironport. On the personal front, I was born and raised in India. I've been calling Bay Area my home for the last 14 years. I live with my wife and two little ones here. My younger one is turning 1 year old in next few weeks. So looking forward to that. Yeah.
So you're going to get some sleep now, huh? Most likely.
Yeah. Hoping that that'll get better. Yes.
Yeah.
Neeraj, you want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, sure. Hey, glad to join this chat alongside Satish. My name is Neeraj Mathur. I've been into the product management area for a long time, been in the industry for 20 plus years, working through large companies such as Cisco, Sun Microsystems, Silicon Graphics, also been part of multiple successful startups in security, and most recently at a fintech company called Fortinet.
Thank you. Now, I'm not going to ask you this question, Neeraj, because I think I know too much about you now. But Satish, tell me something that we cannot Google about you.
Sure. Before I say that, so a lot of we had an overlap at Cisco, Neeraj and me, and then a lot of background similarity in cybersecurity space and product roles. Yeah.
Very true.
Definitely.
So I think the question was, tell me what you can find on Google. Let me see. Well, I would say one of the things which very few know is my love for mixology. That's something about just making new cocktails or kind of making my own twist on the popular cocktails kind of excites me. I just feel like that kind of keeps my creativity side going on, right? So,
what's your favorite cocktail?
So I like to make my own twist on most of these popular ones. So it depends on who you ask. My wife doesn't really appreciate much of the experimentation. Sometimes I do. Many of them end up in my kitchen sink. But I think something which is popular is the Mumbai Mule. It's a twist of the Moscow Mule, where I kind of add in some of the Indian spices in there and just make it a little more interesting.
Nice.
Awesome. That sounds so. This calls for at some point in time maybe a session on just mixology. That's going to be fascinating. I did buy a book many years ago, but I don't think that's my style. I've just stuck with wine. That's all I stick with.
Cool. I just ended up, one of my friend who was visiting was nudging me to go to a course one of the summer. I think going back maybe in early 2010s. I took a course in San Francisco, spent a week on mixology, and then, just kept doing this, for social gatherings and stuff. Done some mixology events for my close friends' parties and stuff. So yeah, enjoy that.
Awesome. I mean, you never have to look for a reason for icebreakers. You already have such an awesome one.
That's cool. All right, so let's get started into why we're here today. The topic discussion for today's episode is how to break into product management and the first 90 days. So to begin with, if someone's looking to get into product over the last few years has grown exponentially in terms of visibility and the number of candidates looking for product jobs. So if someone is looking to get into product, how should they start to go about doing that?
Sure. I think this, as you mentioned, right, this seems to be a trend which I've seen, at least over the last 4 to 5 years, which continues to grow up. I get asked this question quite often from different peers, friends, and how do they break into product management? I guess one of the first few conversations when this happens, one of the question I really start this conversation with is, why do you want to break it into product, right? I think that level of clarity, trying to understand what they're trying to get into, is very important for them to really ask that question to themselves before they even kind of embark on that whole big journey, right? Uh, the reason I kind of lead with that is when I have this conversation with different folks, I think there is a very different interpretation of what product role really means, depending on who you ask and where they come from. So I guess what I've seen is when you ask this question to somebody who has spent most of the time in a B2B world or a B2C, so you get very different kind of answers. And then how the product role you see fit in a large organization is very different than what a product role you would see in a startup kind of an environment, right? I think the foundation principles remains the same, but on a day-to-day basis, what you do changes drastically. So it's good to understand when you say product, which specific area which you're trying to break it into product management, and what does product management mean for you, right? So that's the conversation which I usually start with. But it's easy to say, while there are multiple different ways where you can break into product management, I think one of the easiest way to do that is in the same organization which you currently are, because of the trust and credibility which you have built over the years, right? Just makes it a little bit more easier if you're currently in an engineering team, or let's just say design or a customer success, right? I'm just calling out these because these are the most popular ones which I've seen where people try to kind of break into product management from these different functional areas. So those are the typical ones what I've seen. We can talk more and how it really means to break into from each one of these functional area.
Definitely. Neeraj, you want to add anything to that?
And I think Satish captured it. I take a step back. I think asking the why is extremely important. And in terms of asking the why, also think about what is it that you're trying to get to. So that just like, why do I want to get into product management, and what impact do I want to have that I'm not able to have in the current role that I'm in, whether it's customer success or sales or marketing or design or engineering, and how do I then will have more ability to make that impact happen. And to Satish's point about continue to do this in your existing organization, that is absolutely on point, particularly if you're trying to transition into this function. It seems like one of those product management is one of those functions where you see people coming from very different walks of life. And that's excellent for the product function, for the organization, for the teams, and for the product teams themselves, because then you have a wide area of experiences coming in to help build something for our customers that allows it to be extremely useful, extremely valuable, and be able to solve for a particular problem that the product team is actually trying to solve for. So in terms of breaking into it, I'd echo on Satish's point, is try in your existing org, find people or product or teams that are building the product that you like, that you use, that is part of your organization, that you are involved with, and bring in a perspective from the customer side that allows for additional value to go into the product building, continues to expand on the problems that a product will solve. And if you're in a customer success, sales, marketing, one of these customer-facing roles, it is extremely valuable, the conversations you're having with customers, to bring that perspective into the product team. Own a small part of it. Drive a change for a little feature, a little capability, something that is small enough that allows you to actually bring in your perspective, allows for you to become be embedded, if you will, with a small product team, to drive that change through, to show that not only can you bring value, but you can also see something to the end. Because from concept or ideation to shipping, there's a whole lot of product management that needs to happen into that. Most people who are trying to break into, they're like, oh, I get to write this user story, and then it just somehow magically happens because engineering is going to go do magic. But there's a whole lot of grunt work that needs to be done to explaining, making sure it's going to be useful, making sure you exactly got what the customer really wants and needs, and kind of go about it. So start from the internal and then kind of figure out where you want to go next.
Definitely. It's an interesting point you bring up, because a lot of times, or sometimes, people tend to think that the product manager's role is glamorous. You get to tell people what to do, what to build, how to build, and they think of it as being a glamorous role, when in fact it's in the trenches, getting your hands dirty, doing some of the grunt work at times. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions many people have who are looking to aspire into becoming a product manager.
Yep. I think you guys captured it very well, right? I think, as you said, Pradeep, I think it's sometimes, as you see it from the outside lens, it could be over glorified in many different ways. I think it's still about having that ability to be organized and structured and capturing those minute details, while able to kind of communicate that both at an exec level or at a customer facing lens. You just use the same set of data and then customize it as you talk to the different personas, right? And the individual stakeholders within the organization. But in general, going back when this, typically when I have these conversations, when people ask me about this among my friends who are looking to transition, or just different peers who are very early in their career, my suggestion usually has been to just pick your own product within your organization and try to get deep insights into what is your product vision and goal, right? It's very often that you get into that hunker down mode. You're trying to work on your feature, trying to get it out in a very agile fashion every 2 weeks. You're in that constant rat race, right? So trying to step away from that and trying to understand the bigger picture is important to kind of start and understand the product role. So that can be done in different ways, right? Where I often ask people saying that, have you taken the time to spend, if it's a publicly trading company, to join your earnings call on a quarterly basis, just to understand what your C-level folks are saying, right, to the Wall Street, or whether it's your all hands meetings, right? Trying to tie what you're doing on a daily basis to the bigger vision of the company and your product. That kind of helps you understand where this is all going, and just sets a good vision, just understanding of the market in general. And another piece is just a good understanding of the market landscape, right? Just trying to keep up with what's happening in the technology space which you're in, and understand the competitive landscape, different insights which you can kind of funnel it back to the PM. If that's where you want to get to, you start walking in the shoes, right? So I kind of break this down into 3 different steps, right? So I say observe, right? You try to shadow your PM. Not necessarily, might not be possible in every organization, but in your meetings with your product people, in the emails or the documents what they capture, or the initial business review meetings what you have, where you're trying to understand the scope of what you're trying to build, understand where they're coming from, ask them why should we build this, right? Who is it really asking? So that gives you some insights by just observing different product folks on what do they do and why are they really trying to do build certain elements of the product. And did you have something to add, Neeraj?
No, this is great. Please keep going. Yeah.
Okay. So on the observe element is really about learning just passively by looking at what product team is doing. And then I think the next step is, now once you kind of get a good grasp of what do they do on a regular basis, now based on where you are within the organization, try to find areas where you can actively help product management. I'll just go back in time and talk about my story, how I transitioned, right? So I'll talk about the most common ones, at least in the technology space, where you see product management, people come from engineering background, people come from customer success, what Neeraj was mentioning, and the other piece is design. Design is very popular, another functional area where you see people transition into product role from. So I come from the engineering side, way back early in my career. So as I was thinking about this session, I spent some time reflecting on how did I really transition to this role, right? This was way early in my career. I've been in product role for a little over 8 years now. So as I was thinking and trying to jot down my thoughts, I think it wasn't necessarily one single event which kind of led me into product management. I would definitely say it's a culmination of multiple things which I've done over the years in my engineering role, which kind of led me into the product role. But the actual transition really happened in one of the cybersecurity startups which I was working on called Ironport very early in my career. Just very typical to any startup. Even when I was in engineering, I had an opportunity to interact with many customers. We were launching a 1.0 product. I think we all understand what that means, going from 0 to 1. So what it meant was dealing with many customer escalations, spending a lot of time with customers to help with the initial deployments. And I was back then I was single. I enjoyed traveling, and I took every opportunity to visit customers, right? Look, we are talking about a B2B product, so it meant deployment was usually a couple of days or even sometimes weeks process. So I was on site trying to help smoothen out the process and then help them realize the full value of the product. So I would have PM with me maybe for the first day or so, but I would spend more time from the engineering side to make sure the deployment was smooth, at least for some of the big logos. I think that was the time during many of these customer visits, something which was really eye-opening for me was, as an engineer, what I was building was, I assumed that the product would be used certain ways. And when you really see the actual customer environment and how they were using it, could be drastically different than what you have really imagined initially. So I guess these were the times which I was trying to start to think outside in, right? What you call from the customer driven lens, rather than looking at from feature wise and how do I fit a problem to this feature now, right? I think this is where I think a lot of times, I think my wife tells me a lot about this, my pedantic nature of kind of organizing and structuring everything. I was capturing all of this different customer feedback from my visits and just bringing it back very naturally to the headquarters and sharing with the broader team. So over time, what has happened is product team kind of engaged me in different interactions where I was just sharing my insights, and the product team was growing, and then the product was getting traction, and it was a very natural transition, right? What I figured out is when I look back, I haven't really deliberately planned a transition to product, but it just turns out some of the skills what I had were transferable to PM, and some of the things which I was doing just in the startup nature just kind of naturally led me to product role. So I think just that's my personal story there, but I think I take some of those learnings when people ask me this question and kind of provide a bigger picture on how they could kind of look for different opportunities to help product people. So if you're from an engineering background, figure out what are the different trends, what you're seeing within the product, right? Are you seeing a huge technical debt, which is kind of stopping innovation from happening at a bigger velocity? Or are you seeing a lot of defect ratio coming in a specific area? Pick out those trends, try to structure your thoughts, and then just share your insights. I mean, you have nothing to lose, right? If that helps your product team in some way, that kind of gets the conversation going where you develop a strong relationship with them.
Yeah, excellent point. I think you touched on a few very interesting things here. So in terms of breaking in, I'm thank you for sharing your personal story, because that's what resonates, particularly coming in from engineering. Look, I was also in engineering, although it was way back when. It was actually almost, I can say, like a different century at that point in time. But there's three things that you call out that anyone listening, particularly if you're early or mid in your career, you're making the transition into product management function, some key skills to have. The reason why we see a lot of the design, UX, customer success, and engineering folks move into product management is most of these functions interact with customers. So the ability to actually speak with customers, I cannot emphasize this enough for anyone into product management today and moving, is like, if you're not talking to customers regularly, you are going to pay a very big price over the long run. Talk to your customers every day, every week, if you can't do every day, very, very frequent basis, so that you can build a muscle for understanding those customer insights and be able to articulate them. Second, you kind of joked about it, but I think the ability of a product manager to, you called it the pedantic nature of organizing things, being able to organize these things into themes, into buckets, to kind of bring it all together, that whether this is a need for one or a need for many, and to articulate that in a fashion that how do you actually deliver a value to many, 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 to be able to make the product more successful is incredibly important. And then the other the factor that comes into some of these things is the ability to, you can go to a customer, can have the ability to put things into perspectives, into buckets. But if you're not doing active listening, if you're not really letting the customer speak through all that they want to talk about from their workflow, from their problem, from their process standpoint, you're going to miss out to be able to what's being said. And also on the inference time when you're putting these things into buckets of what was not said. So having these three sets of, talk to the customers, build the capability to customer insights, organize your thoughts, build those themes, and do active listening are some very, very core things that people should practice to kind of break into PM.
Definitely. Now, any specific comments that you have for people who have or are currently in the design team or the UX team who want to move into PM? How can the skills that they have, I know we spoke about the customer and listening to the customers, what you just mentioned, but is there any other guidelines that you may have for people coming in from the UX and design the side?
Sure. So I think I'll answer that in a bit, but I think in general, just going back to that, some of the thoughts from Neeraj, right? So just trying to understand from a whole product perspective, who kind of sits at the intersection between this technology, design, business, and customers lens, right? So whether you're an engineer or a design person or customer success, figure out where your strengths are, your customer facing, amplify that, and figure out opportunities to help in that space. And now there are certain areas which you have gaps where you want to strengthen further. Identify those gaps clearly. Let's say in this case for design purpose, right? So maybe it is the element of understanding the technology which goes behind it, or maybe it's the element of working more closely with your customer success partner, right? So all of these trifecta can kind of come together and kind of culminate to a product. So when you kind of leverage that stakeholders relationship very well and kind of observe them very closely, it kind of makes you more well-rounded to kind of move towards a product role.
Definitely. Now, what about, people from engineering, UX, design, customer service, success, they have years of experience or they have some experience behind them. For someone who's coming out of a business school or undergrad, or someone who hasn't had much real world experience, for a lack of a better term, what would you say to someone who's maybe graduating, about to graduate, or maybe even next year graduating and looking to get into the product space?
Yeah, sure. I can take that one on first, and maybe Satish can then add some more perspective to it. So if you're coming out of a B school or a bachelor's program, some kind of school program, you're out, I'd say your first approach should be think about all the different associate PM programs that are offered in large companies. Startups do bring people on board. I have seen that happen. It's not common, it's very rare. Startups do bring in people into some operational roles, the customer success roles, and then those people then transition into PM. But if you're straight out of school wanting to get into PM, I'd say your best bet would be to go to an organization that has an associate product manager role sort of defined. I think Google championed this. They put it in place first, and they did a remarkably good job. But there are other programs. Pretty much all large companies have one to that effect. The key thing goes back to Satish's point, understanding what you're really good at. And I also champion the fact that understand what you're not good at. And there's the gap. There are some things you like to do, some things you don't like to do, but you have to do because that's what the function requires you to do that. So one example could be if you're a very extrovert, speaking with customer comes to you naturally. If you are great at writing press releases and different kinds of collateral marketing material, user stories, that comes to you very naturally. But if you're fresh out of school, you may not understand all the different technologies underneath. You may not understand the market landscape, the market itself. You may have some of these, you may have familiarity with some of these terms, which is great, but you need to go a little more than just the superficial knowledge of them, if you will. Satish made an excellent point earlier about listening to these calls from earnings perspective. I'd advise anyone who's coming out of school or is kind of first year into product management is like, hey, go read up a lot of the stuff that Warren Buffett's yearly newsletter actually provides. Read up the past 10 years and sort of correlate that with some of the public earnings. For many of these public companies have these earnings calls available publicly. Listen to them. So you get a better understanding of what are they talking about. And if you want to take a deeper level from an analytics standpoint, become very sort of deep data-oriented person, try to look at the correlation between, from an external perspective, the correlation between what the announcements were, where the money was, where the stock moved up or down, or what the industry did, adjacency. And internally, kind of look at, okay, well, this company does Agile. How many tickets do they process in a week? What is the defect ratio? How often do they release the product? What's the cadence? That kind of stuff. All of these different skills, I know I spewed out a bunch of information here for somebody who's just looking at it, but you have to start with what I'm really good at, what am I not good at, and find out if there's interest to kind of learn some of those skills, and then find people. One of the biggest things you're going to do over your long career in PM or otherwise is networking. And when you've identified people, your skill sets that you're not good at personally, maybe you don't want to do it, right? I mean, there are certain things that I personally am like, yeah, this is engineering. I love engineering. I have been an engineer. I have a background in that. I'm a technology guy. However, deep down, how do you configure a AWS instance? That is not my core skill set. How do you run a DevOps function per se? That is not my core skill set. But what I do have is I know people who do this for a living and do a damn good job of doing it. So whenever I have a problem, I'm like, picking on the phone, hey, can you help me with this? So knowing what you're good at, not knowing what you're not good at, and then who you might going to go to be able to bring that piece in. Because product, it is not a glamorous job at all. It is a job, it's the glue that keeps the entire product together, internally and externally. It is one of those jobs, and I think there's a Spider-Man saying, comes great, with great with great powers comes great responsibility. PMs have all the responsibility, but really literally zero power, right? I come from the school of PMs are not the CEOs. PMs are actually facilitators, curators, people who are driving the initiative forward, but they don't have all the powers. And why I bring that up is the hard work that goes into being a PM actually shows in the quality of the product built and the usefulness and value found by the customer for whatever you're building.
Definitely makes sense. it's right now it's very competitive with everything that's going on. So it's a tough landscape to get into, and there's different ways to differentiate yourself to land these positions. Now, talking from a sales perspective, how do you guys think that someone can transition from sales into product management? And someone who's done sales in the past, we talk as a salesperson, talk to customers all day, every day. And a lot of times it's, there's that balance between customer wanting certain features or certain things on the roadmap, where internally the product managers are thinking, we don't want to go in that direction. And that's one of the biggest friction elements that I've seen, where a salesperson comes in and says, I can close this big deal, but we just need to have this. It shouldn't really take you that long to put in, right? So I've sat in those conversations, numerous times. But from your perspective, obviously talking to the customer is a great plus for salespeople. What else would you say for someone who's in the sales role looking to shift into a product role?
Yeah, I'd love to hear from Satish on this as well. From my perspective, one of the key fundamental things that's different in sales versus product is I've seen only 2 people do that transition in my career. And I'm sure there's plenty out there, but I've only been privy to a couple, but I've heard about a bunch. The nature of sales, if you're in a public company, actually it doesn't matter whether you're in a public company or a private company, sales is a very, quota carrying sales is transactional. Yeah. Product management is anything but transactional. It's a long-term view. And that therein fundamentally lies a difference in terms of how the thinking works, right? So salespeople need to actually close the deal out. They need to get the check in. And once that deal's done, okay, on to the next one, right? So they do this over and over and over again within a month, within a quarter. And then everything you did past quarter walks away. You got to go all that. Product management doesn't have that liberty. You built a feature, you got to take it all the way through. And by the way, you need to think about, is it going to be one customer, as I mentioned earlier, or it's going to be n number of customers? The odds that you have a successful product or will have a successful, sustainable product is how many features you built that are used by n number of customers, not by one. So that mindset needs to change of thinking long-term versus transactional. Second thing, one of the biggest things that even in a startup, product managers actually have a hard time, especially working with CEOs sometimes, is this problem of the next shiny thing. Salespeople can get really excited about this one deal that's going to close out just next week. It's going to happen, and it's going to give me 100,000, $250,000, $500,000, whatever number deal. We don't can't afford to actually go after the next shiny thing today and actually go after the next shiny thing tomorrow. Primarily, again, as I said, we have to think holistic. We have to think about the broader impact of what we are going to do. So a lot more planning goes into, I would say, the approach that salespeople have in terms of nurturing a prospect to convert into a lead is the mindset product managers have, and salespeople should bring that perspective of nurturing the product, understanding the need of the customer. And there are awesome sales folks who did an excellent job of nurturing leads, really getting to the bottom of what the customer needs are, wants are. Those aspects, I think that's the relatable thing that a salesperson can actually bring into product management function. The other part is when you, as a salesperson, you're kind of like, you're trying different messaging with different customers, right? Because you're trying to see, okay, what exactly works here? I think that mindset, whether they look at it or not, is the mindset of experimentation. Product managers have an amazing job ahead of them, and they actually do this with their design counterparts as well, is trying to do this experimentation. Bring that mindset of trying different messaging with different, it happens a lot in startups and larger companies, messaging of what you sell, the value proposition, the ideal customer profile, a lot of that stuff is set up. But in a startup, anything is fair game. If something's selling and has a value, hey, we unlocked this next new thing that we could now sell not just to the lawyers, but we can sell to financial industries and now to other regulatory industries. Bring that experimentation mindset and be okay with failure. Look, salespeople have the biggest advantage. They wake up on the first day of the quarter, slate is clean. and they'll toil through it for the quarter. Whatever they did, it's gone. So that's sort of a mindset. I start up and I go through it and I have my learnings. I move on to the next one. That's a great mindset to have in a startup sort of an environment from a product management standpoint. It's like, don't go bet the whole company on something, but keep experimenting, try new things. And when you fail, you're like, okay, on to the next one, right? So I think there are some relatable skills that a salespeople can actually bring up. I also know that sales requires relationship building, which is influencing. Product management is all about that. You got to build good relationship with engineering, with design, with the entire organization. You need to do that. Second, articulation. So that's an amazing thing that salespeople are actually blessed with. Great salespeople can articulate their product in a very succinct manner. And product managers need to actually do that in a different language to each person. If you're going to design, you're going to talk about the value of usability and experience and everything else. If you want to be in a part, have a seat at the table with engineering, you got to understand the technology. You don't have to make the how part of it. You don't have to articulate that. Actually, please don't articulate the how. Especially if you've moved from engineering into product, just because you understand the how, please don't do that. It's just your function is to define the why and the what. Stay in that. Provide guidance, but don't prescribe it, so to speak. And then the other part that comes to is when you're speaking with your executive team, elevate that conversation to not get into the nitty-gritty of details, because the CEO is looking for you to provide that strategic direction, not needing to know. Actually, most CEOs I know would not want to know. There are some that are like, why did we label that button that? There are those as well. And that happens more in early stage startups. And I think that's a good place to have something like that in a product-led organization. But there's multiple different ways for salespeople to actually transition into product. Satish, I don't know if there's anything I'd like to add that based on what I said.
No, I think you covered it pretty well, Neerav. I think you were spot on. But yeah, just to add to that, right? So I think just going back to the tactical versus strategic nature of the roles, I think it's very easy to see some short-term wins, but quickly winning some of those big deals. The numbers might look great for the next quarter or two, but I think the nature of product management is really about long term, right? Like, does this really kind of align what we're doing for this one specific customer? Does it really go back to my product vision, what I've set out for the broad set of customers, right? And every time you kind of have a very North Star metric, which your product really works towards, and every time you kind of shift directions, it has a side effect on other metrics, which kind of get sidelined sometimes when you kind of keep focus on one metric. So keeping that short-term goals versus long-term goals is very important. That's where the strategic nature of the role really becomes very important. Yep. Definitely. But I think one thing which I would add, though, is just going back to the art of selling is something which is very important for product management. Whether you're selling what to build to the engineering team, or whether you're selling how to kind of message this or show the value prop, the actual benefit to the end customer with your product marketing team, or whether it's the pricing conversations we all have with our finance team on how to price this product right? So all of this is really selling your thought process, selling your vision of the product to all of these internal stakeholders at the same time with your customers, right? You're not just talking about what's out there in the product, but many times product management role, as you have that initial conversations with potential customers, is give them the direction of where the industry is going in the next 3 years, and how do you envision your product kind of solves some of those unmet needs of these customers, right? So I guess it really boils down to that art of selling, which a lot of these sales folks can bring to the table.
Yeah. One thing I'll add here, you said something that caught my attention. So, Satish's point about looking at landscape from a 3-year or a long-term perspective, right? So that's true for certain industries in larger companies. In startups, particularly, having a plan beyond a year is kind of too far out already. Market change, and we're talking early stage startups that are yet to find their product market fit and stuff. So the way to think about would be, well, having an idea of where the market's going to go is great, but have that articulation of next 3, 6, 12 months, and then double down on basically honing in on the whole product management. The world is filled with the now, next, later kind of a roadmap policy. I say apply that to a lot of your strategic thinking as well as like, what am I going to do now? And that now could be, depending on the size of the company, state of the company, could be just this month, the next month, and the quarter. So your now, next, later could be this month, next month, and the quarter, or you could be this quarter, the next quarter, and the next 6 months. Keep that sort of a transition in mind, because landscape of market, look, 6 months ago, all plans everyone have been kind of flipped on their head because COVID happened, right? So something like this, and it's not that the COVID happened as such, it is one of those bizarre ones. However, industry is changing very, very dramatically, very fast. So understand which industry you're playing in, where you're playing, and then sort of adapt to that sort of modeling very quickly.
Definitely.
Spot on. I think it goes back to the point that your roadmap or what you have is, it's not something which is set in stone, that needs to adapt and shift as things change in the market, right? So having that mindset that just like pricing, which is an iterative process, as you launch a product, your product roadmap can change as with the market needs and the customer needs, right? Yeah.
Definitely. So let's shift gears now into, we've got this product management position. It could be a smaller org, it could be a startup, it could be a large corporation, right? What are some of the things that newly minted product managers should do, someone who's transitioned, got out of school, what should they do for the first 60, 90, 30, 60, or 90 days?
So, I think this is very important for not just product management role, for anybody who's walking into any role, right? This could apply to somebody who's just joining in fresh into an engineering role, or, this is most common among leadership and executive roles. But I think I really wish I've started this way early in my career, something which I've started doing in the last 4 to 5 years. But I think the analogy which I give to folks who kind of join product team very recently is, think about this as your product, right? You have your good metrics, goals for your product. Why not for yourself? You're a product. Think about yourself as a product, right? Define metrics for your first 90 days. And then how do you kind of approach this? And having that clear set of goals, and then more importantly, once you kind of chalk it out, review that with your leadership team, so they understand, is this all fitting into what they are looking and expecting from this role, right? So I think that could vary essentially across different organizations, but the foundation of this should be focused on really the learning aspect of it, right? Think about this as your honeymoon period, right? Like, you get to ask all sort of questions for the first 90 days without any hesitation. So I would kind of break this down into 4 different themes in different ways. First, start with the whole learning process, right? Go out. This is the time for you to ask questions, build relationships. This first 90 days is all about building that trust, understanding who are the people in your organization, who are the different stakeholders within the organization, right? As a product manager, you're trying to understand who are the key people in engineering, right? Who are the key folks I need to constantly interact with? Who are the folks in marketing? Who are the folks in the finance team or my sales team? And then, so we're talking about all of the internal stakeholders. Understand the culture and the process there. How often do they meet? And what is the typical expectation from a product manager in this role, right? So making sure you set the right expectations with the team as you walk into an existing product just kind of helps out. And then the second thing, as you kind of do that internally, at the same time, it's equally important you spend this time and meet your customers, right? So spend a lot of time in this first 90 days with your customers. This could be your existing customers, and at the same time, spend some time with your potential net new customers who could be looking at your product further down the lane. I think one of the, if I have to give a very specific example here, is I've seen, at least in specific organization, which has seemed to have worked out very well, as a quick way to kind of spend most time with the customers is go to your customer success team and then shadow them for a week, right? I mean, these are the folks who are spending day in and day out. They're talking to at least 5 to 10 different customers on a day-to-day basis, whether it's a customer success or the customer support team. You get to hear what is the pulse of the customer directly from them, right? So that gives you a good volume of customers who you can hear from. But again, at the same time, keep in mind that all of these folks are really calling about an ongoing issue. So it's a very reactive way of hearing things. It's always good to have a conversation when customer is not really calling you about an ongoing issue, where you can have an open slate conversation, right? Talk about what's happening in their organization. Where do they see the organization grow? How is their organization evolving? That's more of a very proactive conversation. I used to spend a lot of time earlier in my career in customer escalations, right? It's a more reactive where you're doing firefighting and you don't really get much insights other than that ongoing burning issue on a broader level at that point. So trying to have those conversations beyond this firefighting, beyond these escalations, gives you a different insight into the product. So internal teams and spending a lot of time with customers. And then the other piece is just understand your product, right? Spend a lot of time, use your product. If it's a B2C product, use it. And even if it's a B2B product, try to get access to the lab or wherever the product is and get a hang of how your customers are using it. And I think this is more specific to B2B, where it's very interesting that the purchase decision maker, the guy who is actually purchasing the product, is very different from the person who's actually using the product. So there's a technical decision maker. His wants are completely different sometimes than what the business decision maker is, right? He's looking at, maybe I should consolidate my infrastructure. How do I reduce my operational costs? But when you talk to the technical decision maker, you're really hearing a different story there, right? You're really hearing from him, hey, these are a typical set of things which I want to do on a day-to-day basis. Can you help me solve those problems? That's exactly what he's looking from you. So try to talk to different personas, have a C-level meeting, but at the same time, have a meeting with somebody who's actually using your product day in, day out, right? Who's hands-on. So the internal teams and the customer teams, and then the third piece is spend some time on competitive landscape, right? I think it's good to hear from your existing product folks who are within the team with different stakeholders, but do your own research, right? Just look at what the market landscape is. Who are the competitors out there, and are there any emerging new competitors in that space? And how are they currently navigating in this scenario, right? That gives you a broader view of the product. I think it's very often that you will see that bias for action is very big thing for a lot of product managers. You're trying to get into stuff, you're trying to build stuff, but it's important to kind of take a step back for the first 90 days and understand things, consume. Yes, it's okay to have, like, figure out what are the small wins which you can have during this time. Pick the small wins, pick a small feature or capability, pick a small problem which you want to try to solve for the customer, right? So I think in essence, what I would do, I would say, is have very clear set of goals. I mean, these goals could be as simple as, I want to meet with 30 customers in my first 90 days. And I want to spend a week with my customer success team, right? And join maybe 100 different calls. I want to do a complete install of my own product and check out all of the different capabilities what my product does. Have those clear goals so you can come back in 90 days and see where you stand. And then it's a good point to kind of go back to your leadership team and figure out, say, where you are and what do you want to do in the next quarter or so, right?
Yeah, those are all valid points. If I may add on just a couple things to that, I would say, well, first off, everyone, doesn't matter what level you are in, go get this book.
Hold it there. Let me take a screenshot. I'll hold it there, right there. All right, I'm good.
All right. So first, go get this. I've been using this book. I've actually given away previous editions to a couple of folks in terms of who have transitioned. Doesn't matter whether you're starting your career new or you're actually a seasoned person or you are in a leadership role. Having a 30, 60, 90 is critical. If you're starting, so not only just in terms of what Satish pointed out about learning, understanding your product, meeting your teammates, and getting a hang of what's going on in the organization, but also this is a very good way for you to get on the same page with your manager and to kind of see during the interview process, or the whatever is the process. If you moved internally, you had an engagement with the hiring person, what are their top challenges and that kind of stuff. Sometimes the course of these exchanges are so long, in a month or 2 or 3, sometimes even more, that the needs that you heard on the first month of the exchange when you started to the time when you landed in the seat in the job has changed. So having that aspect of like, okay, here's what my plan for 30, 60, 90 is. What is it that you want me to accomplish in this time frame, is actually making sure that both of you are on the same page. It's one thing to walk in and say, well, here's what I want to do. And your manager's like, well, that's not what I think is important right now, but I need you to do this. But if you haven't had a chance to do that sort of a sync, then you're actually out of sync. And it eventually leads to problems. So that's one. Second, Satish covered a lot of interesting things, and I want to add on to a couple more, if possible, to those. Get into, if you can, depending on your level and where you have joined the organization, how small, large the organization is, get into some of those sales calls. See how the salespeople are actually selling the product. How are they pitching it? Are they actually pitching the product that the marketing people actually wrote the entire value proposition and the messaging and all that stuff? Because I've been in large companies. What marketing is sometimes doing is actually very different from how sales is selling it. And it's a very, or what they're upselling, right? They could be upselling something that the market is like, oh, I was not even aware of that. We're not running any campaigns around it or something like that. So I think those kinds of things are incredibly important to be able to. Sorry about that.
Hi, Tim.
You want to come here? Okay. We are going to get a very young product manager into the whole exchange. This is the fun of working COVID times, where you actually get all kinds of new co-workers and co-collaborators. So looking at the sales calls and working with the marketing folks to kind of understand the programming is extremely important. And I think the other aspect I would say ask is from an engineering standpoint. If you're speaking with engineering, ask them what are their issues that you actually need to work with as well, and to break those into product and be able to do that. Carry on.
So, definitely. Go ahead.
Yeah. So just to add to that, right? So as you come in as a new product manager, it's very important to understand it's a very generalist role, right? It just goes back to the point what Neeraj was mentioning. So if you're coming in from any of the specialist roles, it's very important to understand that you will be wearing multiple hats on a given day, right? That's the most fun part of it. It's the most challenging part of it. So as you do that, it's important to understand you keep you as a communication hub, keep that communication going back, right? So I think it's very often you would see a product manager kind of being double booked in multiple different on any given day for different meetings. So so how do you scale that as a product manager, right? If you build these relationships where you effectively communicate on what the product vision is and what you're trying to achieve, if everybody gets onto that same page, you can take away a lot of those different smaller meetings which show up on your calendar in terms of making those small little decisions. You would want to empower them to make those decisions, or come with you with the opinion saying that, hey, this is the route which I want to take. Sounds good, right? So just makes your life much more scalable. At the same time, you're just bringing all of the team on the same page.
Yeah, and if I may add one, I think this is something that's been one of the things I have done in my career over as a PM in the 30, 60, 90 is be in a position by the end of 60, 90 days where you can very clearly articulate the mission. Why do we exist? Why are we here to do this? Be able to then talk about the product vision. Where are we going? based on why we exist, where are we going? And then go down the path of next level of product strategies. Like, okay, how are we going to get there? What is the path we are taking? There are multiple paths always. There's a distribution path that you can look into from a channel perspective. That's how we're going to expand. We're going to compete on these capabilities. We're going to compete on this pricing or this or that. Which is the path we are actually, we have chosen, and being able to articulate that is extremely important. And then understand, from your objectives perspectives, like, okay, for that path, here are the steps. These are tactical things. You can translate them as OKRs or priorities or however you want to call them. How are we going to actually get to that stuff? If you can nail that down into the next into the first 90 days, I think that's going to be incredibly important.
Definitely. As we hit the top of the hour, I just want to remind all the viewers that we have a packed schedule for the next 3 months plus. We have a lot of amazing guests coming up. If you guys can check out meetup.com/the product angle, you can check the calendar. And we have, on today's episode, we're actually going to be announcing that on August 14th, we are going to be chatting with Jim Semick, August 14th at 12 noon Eastern. And Jim, if you don't know, is the co-founder of Product Plan. So we're looking forward to chatting with him about demystifying roadmaps. So again, check it out at meetup.com/the product angle. And just to wrap up this session, Neeraj and Satish, thank you so much for your insights and all the information that you've shared. As we close out this session, is there something you'd like to add, something that you wish you learned earlier, or some kind of advice or some kind of knowledge that you'd like to share before we close out the session?
Sure. So I think it's something which is critical, not just from product management role, is walking into a new role, having that growth mindset, right? As opposed to know it all, because it's a constant learning, whether it's from your internal stakeholders or customers or the market landscape, which is ever changing. So having that growth mindset, willing to change what you have stated before based on new set of data, what you're getting, is something which is important for you to accept and for you to kind of move forward in terms of learnings in your career. Yeah.
Thank you.
Practice active listening. Listen more than you speak. Judge no one, because you are not there for the decisions they actually made prior to your arrival. Understanding how they got to those decisions is extremely important, because that'll help you make more decisions moving forward.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Satish and Neeraj. I'm grateful that you guys came on and shared your experiences. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Pradeep.
Okay.
Yep, it's fun.
Thank you for everyone listening. And don't forget to check out meetup.com/the product angle. Okay.